Have you ever noticed how some of the world's most ancient stories seem to, well, echo each other? You know, the story of a divine birth from a virgin mother, a life filled with miracles, a big struggle against darkness, a sacrifice, and then a triumphant return. It's a pattern that pops up again and again across cultures and continents that were separated by thousands of miles and thousands of years. Today, we're going to dive into a really fascinating and, yeah, deeply controversial book from the 19th century that claimed that it found the single, secret key to all of them.
So, let's start right there, with that central puzzle. Why all the similarities? Is it just some huge coincidence? Or is it maybe evidence of a deep, universal human impulse? Some kind of archetype that's hardwired into all of us? Or, and this is what the author of our text believed with all their heart, is it the faint, fragmented echo of one single, ancient story? A story that wasn't written down in books, but in the sky itself.
To really get into that question, we're not just going back to ancient times. We're actually heading to the late 19th century. This was a time of huge intellectual change when this radical, all-encompassing new theory about mythology was taking shape, and it promised to explain nothing less than the origin of all religion.
And here it is. This is our source, a book published way back in 1889 called Aryan Sun Myths, The Origin of Religions. Now you have to remember, this is a total product of its time. People were fascinated with Darwin's theories, and this idea that you could find the evolutionary origin for, well, everything, from animals to languages to whole cultures. This book tries to do exactly that for religion. And the theory it lays out is, let's just say, it's audacious.
Right out of the gate, in the preface, the book makes this really startling claim. It uses the 19th century term Indo-Germanic, which today we'd call the Indo-European language family. And it basically sets the stage for a thesis that's going to try to connect the dots between dozens of different faiths. The argument is that they aren't unique creations at all, but just different local versions of the same core myth.
So, what is this grand theory exactly? Well, the author argues that just beneath the surface of our most sacred stories, beneath all the different names of gods and the details of rituals, there lies a simple, incredibly powerful allegory for the one thing that has dominated human existence since the very beginning: the sun. Okay, so the sun myth thesis goes like this. For ancient people, the sun's journey wasn't just some astronomical event, it was the cosmic drama. The daily rising and setting, that was a battle between light and darkness. The seasonal change in its power, from the amazing strength of summer to the weak, dying light of winter, that was an epic story of life, death, and rebirth. So in this view, the sun becomes the original hero, the first savior, always fighting the demons of storm and cold, only to be born all over again each year.
And where did this master story supposedly come from? The book points to a single origin, a prehistoric people it calls the Aryans. Now, it is absolutely crucial to understand that in the 19th century, this was mostly a linguistic term. It was based on the new discovery that Sanskrit had deep connections to most European languages. So the theory was that this group of people migrated from Central Asia, carrying their sun-worshipping myths with them, and planted the seeds that grew into the mythologies of India, Persia, Greece, and on and on. Of course, this concept of an Aryan race would be tragically twisted in the 20th century, but here, in this text, its roots are in a 19th century linguistic hunt for a common cultural origin.
All right, so let's get into the evidence the author actually presents. The book's whole argument really hinges on drawing these direct lines between savior figures from religions that seem totally disconnected, suggesting they're all just variations on a single solar theme.
Now, this is where it gets really interesting, because you can see how the book lays out its case. Just look at the patterns it points to. For Krishna in India, a virgin birth to Devaki. For Buddha, a virgin birth to Mahamaya. For Osiris in Egypt, born on December 25th to a virgin mother. The book just meticulously stacks up these alleged similarities, from divine proclamations to redemptive acts, and even resurrection after 3 days in the case of Krishna.
So what the author is saying is that what you're seeing here is what they call a germ story. They argue this isn't a coincidence, but proof of a shared narrative blueprint that was just passed down through time. A divine being born of a virgin who lives, suffers, dies for humanity, and is then resurrected. This, the book claims with total certainty, is the original sun myth, just playing out in a human, allegorical form.
And the theory doesn't stop with just the stories. The author claims this solar connection goes way deeper, into the very fabric of religious practice itself. They argue that many of our core rituals are actually far older than the religions we usually connect them with today. So the book points to rituals like baptism and connects it to the ancient worship of sacred life-giving rivers, which were seen as reflections of the heavens. It calls the Eucharist, the idea of eating sacred bread that symbolizes a god, one of the most ancient of doctrines, something practiced long before Christianity. It even claims the sign of the cross was a pre-Christian symbol in places like Babylon, and that the 40-day Lenten fast has a striking parallel in ancient Germanic rites for the spring goddess Oysteri, which, by the way, is where we get the word Easter.
Okay, so this brings us to the real heart of the theory. We need to see how the author connects all these gods and stories and rituals back to the sun's actual, physical journey across the sky. This is really the key that unlocks the whole thing, according to the book.
And this slide just lays it out perfectly. The life of the Savior God is basically presented as a direct map of the sun's journey through the year. The birth is the winter solstice, right around December 25th, when the sun is at its absolute weakest in the northern hemisphere and just begins its slow journey back to power. The resurrection is the spring equinox, when light finally wins out over darkness and the earth itself is reborn. The summer solstice is the sun's moment of glory, its peak, and then its decline into winter is its tragic struggle and death, right before the whole cycle starts over.
This astronomical drama, the book argues, is the true, original story that's being told. The 12 labors of Hercules? That's seen as the sun passing through the 12 houses of the zodiac. The life of Krishna, the death and rebirth of Osiris, they're all, at their core, just poetic retellings of the sun's yearly battle against the forces of darkness. And that's a story that would have been incredibly familiar and profoundly important to every early agricultural society on the planet.
Now, we have to put this whole theory into its historical context. Back in 1889, this was presented as a scientific, factual explanation. Today, it is not. Modern scholarship has pretty thoroughly debunked the idea of a single origin. The sun myth theory is now seen as a fascinating artifact of 19th century thinking, a time when people were obsessed with finding single, sweeping origins for complex things. And while the patterns it points out are real and definitely interesting, the explanation of a single source carried by one specific ancient race, well, that's just not supported by evidence anymore. It really relied on cherry-picking similarities while ignoring massive differences, and its core ideas have been replaced by much more nuanced understandings of how cultures actually develop and influence each other.
And so that leaves us with this final, really fascinating question. The book might be a product of its time, but the mystery it tried to solve is still with us. Are these incredible parallels we see in myths all over the world really just the fragmented echoes of a single, lost ancient story? Or is it something deeper? Is it that when all of us look up at the same sun, the same moon, and the same stars, we are simply destined to tell ourselves the same eternal stories of light, darkness, death, and rebirth?